And we've got 25 in the waiting room, so I'll go ahead and let everybody in now.
Terrific. Wow. Okay.
All right. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're calling in from. And welcome to our DALCC moderated conversation discussion with Steve Okun, Thurgood Marshall Jr., and Peter Goelz. I'm Sarah Ichioka. I'm member at large with the Lion City Committee Exco, and I'm being very ably supported this evening by Jim Wagstaff, our secretary. Jim, give a wave. And we just want to thank and give apologies for our Exco chair, Vanessa Moore, who really put together this entire event, but she has a family matter to attend tonight. So she's handed it over to us. Just to note, as you can see, this event's being recorded and it will be broadcast eventually on Facebook. So if you turn on your camera, you're giving us permission to record your image, but we hope that you will, because Steve and our guests are really hoping this is going to be an interactive session. Let me do a quick intro to our three special speakers. We have with us, coming together for their second time speaking to DALCC, but certainly not many other times they've had a chance to interact with each other previously. Three really impressive political operators, if I can say. First, we have Peter Goelz, who is a long-standing Democratic political operative and a veteran of numerous presidential campaigns. In the Clinton administration, he served as the managing director of the National Transportation Safety Board. Now he serves as a senior vice president of O'Neill and Associates, where he offers decades of experience in national crisis communications and federal relations, appearing frequently on CNN, CBS Evening News, Fox News, MSNBC, and others. We also are delighted to have Thurgood Marshall Jr. Mr. Marshall served as White House Cabinet Secretary in the Clinton administration. You'll notice that's the common strand amongst these three. He's been named one of Washington's top campaign and election lawyers by Washingtonian Magazine and chaired the advisory commission of the American Bar Association Standing Committee on Election Law. He's a veteran of multiple US presidential campaign, practices law in Washington, DC, and I am told smokes cigars with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And these two esteemed guests will be in conversation with Stephen Okun. Steve, a great friend of DALCC and very well known to all of us who watch and read the news here in Singapore. Steve is a senior advisor based here in Singapore for the geostrategic consultancy McLarty Associates. He also served on the Clinton administration as Deputy General Counsel at the US Department of Transportation. Steve regularly provides analysis and commentary on US politics, government, and trade for global media, as well as writing commentary for the Straits Times. Welcome, everyone. Stephen has said he's looking forward to a really interactive discussion. I think you're going to structure it in two parts, Steve. So Jim, the way it's going to work is I'll hand over to Stephen. Jim's going to be keeping an eye on the chat. If you have a question that you want to raise, please flag it in the chat. Jim will prioritize it and flag it. And when the appropriate time comes, we'll be calling on people to ask their questions. But over to you, Stephen.
Thank you so much. And, you know, one of the things that Sarah didn't mention, the first campaign that the three of us worked on was the Dukakis campaign in '88. So we have not necessarily the best track record in working on campaigns, but we've always had a lot of fun together. So we're going to structure this, as Sarah said, into two parts. First part will be on the governor's races, the California, which of course we'll do a quick recap and a preview of Virginia. And then we'll stop and take Q&A on those two races. Then I'm going to do a short scene setting for the midterms, and then get Peter and Thurgood's analysis, and then we'll move back to Q&A. So we're going to have as much Q&A as possible. Keep the keep your cameras on. It just will make it a lot more fun. Okay, so kind of where do we start is where the country was. You know, I spent the month of August in the U.S. and I spent a week in D.C. and with Thurgood and Peter, and it's kind of a depressing place right now. There's a lot of angst in the system. You know, the immigration crisis is a real crisis right now. The murder rate is climbing. There is a collapse in confidence in how the country and the president and the administration are handling COVID, and optimism is fading, and it's fading pretty fast. And we don't even need to put, Afghanistan in the execution of the exit, whatever you think of the correct soundness of withdrawing, but certainly there is certainly a negativity around how that withdrawal had been executed, at least in the short term. So things are kind of depressing back in Washington, and this all shows up in the president's approval ratings. Started out and held pretty steady with above water by 10 points, and now it's at best break even, and maybe he's even below water. So that's kind of where the country is as we move into Q3 of the president's first year in office. And I think to keep in mind, I remember all the presentations I gave after the 2016 election. I was like, Hillary barely lost in the electoral college. You flipped 78,379 votes in the right three states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Hillary would have won. Not only could she have won the popular vote, which she did, of course, but she would have won the electoral college as well. Well, you look at 2020, and Biden lost by an even narrower margin than did Hillary. You switch 43,692 votes across three states, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin. Forget that Biden won almost, nearly 8 million votes by a margin of 8 million in the popular election. He would have lost in the electoral college just by less than 50,000 votes swing in those three states. So even though he came in very high from a political operative perspective, he barely won. And things are kind of trending the wrong way right now. And I will say, though, we have, two things. First, California, right? This is a state where Governor Newsom did at least what he should have done. And I think there's some good lessons to take from California. And of course, we have Virginia coming up as well. That's a picture of me with Governor McAuliffe when he was here on a trade mission back, I think it was 2016 maybe. And then Peter was just with the governor at a fundraiser in Virginia. So we won California. I think it's looking good in Virginia, but we'll get the insiders who are in Virginia and working with McAuliffe right now to hear what they're thinking. So bad setup, but we have California. We're going to win Virginia. Thurgood, why? What do you take away from the California election?
Well, first, thanks very much for including me, and I do want to just take a personal note because I'm excited to see my former campaign colleague Paul Risley on screen, and Paul and I worked together on we were part of the Happy Band of Warriors on the Gore 88 campaign. As Vice President Gore likes to say, it's no secret that he ran in 88, but it seemed like one at the time, and Paul and I were part of that small group that worked on that. As far as California, the interesting thing to me has been that the numbers more or less match what occurred in the 2020 presidential election in the state. I think the latest numbers I saw, votes are still being counted, suggest that Governor Newsom on the recall vote may have actually come out with a few more votes in support of keeping him in Sacramento than President Biden did in the state just a few months ago. But clearly, I've been taking away from that race is the fact that although Donald Trump was not on the ballot, his presence was certainly lurking throughout the race. One of the annoying aspects of it, I'm more of an election process and lawyer type than an organizer, and I can address some of the shortcomings or weirdness of the recall process in California as we get further into the discussion. But one of the things that has been interesting to me is that there's a lot of information that's been bandied about in terms of how he got into some trouble, because the polls did appear to be close just a few months ago, and how he pulled himself apparently out of this. Clearly, there's a lot of money involved in getting messages out. There were also a number of clever gimmicks, which probably apply in other locations, especially for incumbent Democrats. He quickly adjusted on COVID. He recognized his problems there. He tweaked the rules on reopening. He provided rebate checks for a number of middle class and lower class families in the state. And he even started the lottery on the vaccines. So he attacked his perceived weaknesses pretty quickly, threw a lot of money, as I say, into the ads, but he caught a break in terms of the leading opposition candidate being a bit of a whack. And Larry Elder, the radio personality, went for the bait on that. And I think one of the lessons you're going to see from this is that the degree to which Democratic candidates can play that game, and that certainly is going to be the case in Virginia, where the issue can be directed more at the challengers, associations to Donald Trump, and that sort of category of questions, as opposed to any concerns that individuals have about incumbents, the better off Democrats are going to be. So that's a bit of a mix of observations. The last one I'll say before you turn to Peter is that if you compare this recall with the recall that put Arnold Schwarzenegger in the governor's office in California, there was also a lot of crossover appeal that Governor Schwarzenegger was able to benefit from. And that was sort of the exact opposite dynamic that played out this year in California.
Peter, your analysis of California?
Yeah, I think it was not just a win. I mean, it was a thumping. They called this election 10 minutes after the polls closed. It wasn't close. And I think Thurgood's right. Newsom proved to be a far more adroit campaigner than people expected. He had some bonehead mistakes. His fundraising dinner at the French Laundry, at the top of the list. But he also, as Thurgood pointed out, initiated a number of innovative responses to this terrible pandemic we had. And Larry Elder, I mean, that he epitomizes the problems that the far right have. They actually believe in their echo chamber that if they just get their message out unfiltered, that they'll win. And they don't moderate it at all to electoral populations. And Elder was completely unfiltered and ended up with a third of the vote, and that's the base. And people will use this election, as a statistical takeoff point on how bad can you do. So, but it was a good win, and it certainly took the Republicans and Fox News off their talking points. So I'm thankful for that.
My favorite line that I read after the vote, Peter, about that unfiltered message that the Republicans and Elder gave out was that the only people that message appeals to are guys with an Uncle Sam suit in their closet. And
right. The guy with the horns who was inside the House of Representatives on January 6th.
So I guess the two takeaways that I kind of had from this was, one is that Newsom was very good at playing offense. He played offense. I'm pro-science. I'm pro-vaccines. I'm pro-climate action. I'm pro women, and the Texas, we could talk a little about Texas, how that played in. So he played offense, and that, the older point that when there's a Trumper on the ballot, without Trump, you lose. If there's a Trumper on the ballot and Trump's on top, then he can win. And so that we could talk about this as we head into the midterms, but what do you think of that, both of those theories? One, the Democrats can't defend what the record has been so much. It's playing offense about what you're for as opposed to what would happen if they come in.
Well, I think one thing, and then I'll turn it over to Thurgood. One is, Democrats have historically and continue to underestimate Trump. As despicable a human being as he is, he understood that Larry Elder was going down, and he did not invest much of his capital at all in California, and stayed away from it, and went through the motions. And so saying that Trump, that this was reflective of some sort of change in people's perceptions of Trump, it's not. He didn't invest, and he couldn't have cared. He moved on immediately that he was defeated. That once Elder was defeated, and he is still a highly dangerous guy. Thurgood.
Well, I hesitate to say this because what my fear has been for the last several years, that complacency will take hold once again, and we'll find ourselves battling in races that we shouldn't be battling in because of complacency and a lack of turnout. But I think one of the things that appears to be a benefit for Democrats going forward, at least for one more cycle, is that the Republican Party has not been able to move away from Donald Trump as cleanly as I had expected. I thought that there would be a number of, for lack of a better way of identifying, mainstream Republicans who are quietly pulling the lever, but a little embarrassed to be doing so for Donald Trump, because they nevertheless opposed the Democratic core positions. I think the problem that the Republican Party is now facing and is going to have to tackle in the coming months is that they've played this game for a little too long of trying to advance candidates who do their best to avoid embracing Trump wholeheartely, but do not call him out and have not called him out. And look, Larry Elder is a full-on Trumper, but as we're going to discuss in Virginia, there's a gubernatorial candidate running in the Republican Party who is doing this dance where he has quietly tried to not offend the Trump wing of the party, but has acted as if he is an old school Republican. And I don't think that the Republicans are going to get away with this as much as I had feared a year or so ago. I think that Donald Trump's ability to bang the drum, whether he's sitting ringside at some boxing match with has-beens or doing his rallies, is working to our benefit at the moment.
So before we get to Virginia, Thurgood, I have one more question for you, and then Rafe has a question in the chat. Rafe can ask that himself. How big an advantage was the monetary, the funds that Newsom raised? How much did that play in? And maybe just give a 30 seconds or a minute of why the recall election structurally advantaged Newsom when it came to fundraising.
Yeah, thanks. This is one of my pet issues. The recall process is not unusual in general. There nearly half the states have some sort of recall for elected officials. It's the fact that California has a lot of surprise, nutty rules in terms of how to play this out, and that's why, because you can qualify as a candidate in a recall by either putting together 7,000 or so signatures or putting up $4,000. That's why you get, as you did in the earlier Gray Davis recall, people like the actor Gary Coleman or the porn star whose producer paid the fee, who almost made it, by the way, into the official debate in that race. There are these low thresholds. There is no reason required for a recall in California. There are other states that have that, but there's also a fundraising requirement system that is out of whack. And what you're getting at, Steve, is the fact that in California for the recall, the most egregious aspect of these process miscues is that the rules limit candidates. So that would be Larry Elder or Cox or Caitlyn Jenner to campaign limits on the donations. They're sizable limits. Individuals can give up to $30-some thousand, which is quite high for a donation limit. But the sitting governor, in this case, Gavin Newsom, is not treated as a candidate, but is treated as a ballot initiative. And so there was no limit on contributions to Governor Newsom. And that resulted in, by news reports, donations from people like Reed Hastings of Netflix of $3 million. Katzenberg, $500,000. The amount of money flowing into the Newsom coffers was significant. And so that clearly had an effect on messaging and on his ability to bring this home for the party. There's one other side aspect to this, which is the frustration I feel as a Democrat that the money had to be raised and spent at all, because this is a race that should not have required that level of contribution, that level of attention. And for example, the Democratic Governors Association put $5 million in, money that they really need to be spending in Virginia, possibly New Jersey, and certainly next year. So there are a lot of frustrating aspects to the process, and it's almost a given that a governor in California now is going to be facing one of these, or at least those efforts. So that's my 30 seconds.
No, just say the headline from that is money matters. And Newsom did as well as he did in part because he raised so much money. And that's something that Democrats are going to need to do in the midterms, because we'll get to that later. But they are going to need to raise a lot of money to be competitive. All right, before we turn to Virginia, we have a California question.
And can I jump in first?
Sure.
Host prerogative. On behalf of Vanessa Moore, our chair who organized this event, following directly on from the topic Thurgood was discussing, Vanessa is really keen to understand your analysis of why, given that the Dems have a supermajority in California, why the state legislature hasn't done anything to change the rule on recalls, or even on how a governor would choose a replacement senator under these conditions. What are the politics behind why they're not taking action structurally?
Thurgood, you're closest to California.
I'm bewildered. I think that's an imperative going forward. I'm a little baffled as to why it hasn't been successfully tackled in previous cycles, but I'm all for trying to make the adjustments necessary to do that. I suspect that part of it is like the issue we have in Virginia, where sitting members of the legislature and party leaders find themselves a bit handcuffed by the fact that there's an appearance that they're affecting their own, they're feathering their own nests potentially. And I think, for example, in Virginia, where the issue is term limit on the governor, a single term, it seems to me that that's an easier one to deal with, but possibly a similar issue in California, where some significant changes are enacted prospectively so that they won't affect sitting elected officials. And then you can sort of backdoor your way into addressing some of these changes, but something needs to be addressed. Even just one of the requirements I mentioned, adjusted in a way that's more rational, I think would help everybody concerned.
And Angela, you had a question? Oh, okay, go ahead, Peter. And then
there has been some discussion in the California leadership, legislative leadership, that this has to be reformed, and I'm hoping Thurgood will be called on to advise them, because this is really a waste of time, a waste of energy, and a waste of money.
Angela, you had a question?
There's even a number. I'm sorry, Steve, if I could just add one more anomaly that unless I'm mistaken, in California, it's possible for a person in a recall, if the governor is recalled, for a candidate to then win with fewer votes. So there are all these sorts of mismatches that not only distort the system, but make little sense.
We do have a couple of California questions that have come in on the chat. Maybe we go back to the one that Ralph had put in. Just kind of summarizing, he's saying, in the national press, New York Times, Washington Post, the results of the recall election seem to be painted as a repudiation of Trumpism. But as you're talking about, the state sort of went the way you expected it to go. Are there any implications at a national level? Can we take anything away from California in terms of the future for the rest of the country?
I'm not sure you can. I wouldn't be too giddy about this win. You as I say, Larry Elder was a particularly incompetent candidate. This was a particularly blue state, and it was a blue state that has fully embraced an expansive voting system. So there weren't any there weren't any hurdles for people to cast their ballots. Every registered voter's got an absentee ballot in the mail. So turnout, it was an issue of organizations being able to generate turnout, and with the money disparity that Thurgood has identified, Newsom should have been able to get his vote out. Democrats should have been able to turn out their members, and they did. So I'm not sure that there's a lot of national significance or lessons you can take from that. But Thurgood or Steve may disagree.
I agree with Peter. I think another thing to remember is to look at the contrast between this recall and the Gray Davis recall that resulted in Arnold Schwarzenegger becoming governor. The approval ratings that Gray Davis was facing at that point were such that he had been moving from the high 40s down toward, I think by the end, the low 20s. His trajectory clearly was not desirable. Newsom's, if I've got the numbers right, we're generally hovering in the high 40s, right around 50 throughout. And Gray Davis was facing severe budget issues and a weak economy. We appear to be emerging in many respects from the virus problems in terms of the economy. So these approval ratings and the economic climate are clearly very important, in my opinion. And so I think that there's reason to be cautiously optimistic for Democrats coming into the next cycle or two, but it's pretty scary. And so I do agree with Peter.
I'll just say that, look, this is a best case scenario for Democrats, right? It's a state where it's 2/3 to 1/3 Democrat to Republican. It's a state where there's zero voting restrictions. There's zero voting suppression. Everybody gets a ballot mailed to them and they can mail that ballot back in. However, we have lost races as Democrats we should have won. We lost in 2000. We should have won that race. So yeah, we should have won, but we did win. And there are lessons you can take from it. And I think it's, go on offense. And part of that is attacking the Republicans. Don't be so worried about defending your record. Put out there what would happen if you lose. And Elder was, of course, the perfect foil for that. I want to move on to Virginia because we can spend, we have so many topics to cover. So let's just move on to Virginia for a minute. So Peter, maybe just give you were just with Terry. Give it just an update of who is Terry McAuliffe? What is he like? Why is he running again? What is his mood going into this? And who is his opponent? And how is his opponent in Virginia much different than Newsom's opponent in California?
Sure. I do know Terry. I've known him since the Carter campaign when I was in New Hampshire and in my old state, and we were campaigning in the primary against Senator Kennedy, and Terry came up. He was a youngster then, and he was a dynamic guy then. This is a guy who is a happy warrior. I mean, I have never seen him not be upbeat, driving, and enthusiastic. I mean, in the darkest days, this guy is a force of light, and he did 4 years of tremendous work in the governor's office. And when he was governor, if he couldn't get it done in the legislature, and he was up against a split legislature or a Republican-dominated legislature, he didn't hesitate to use executive power. He was at the forefront of allowing formerly convicted felons of regaining their right to vote and other legal issues. In Virginia, if you one strike and you were out, and that was it. You could never regain your voting, your right to vote if you were a convicted felon, and he changed that. And he took a lot of heat from the conservative areas of the state, and it didn't affect him. He is coming back for an unprecedented second term, and he is ahead in every poll so far, except there are some disturbing undercurrents that I've seen, and I know he's aware of, that a lot of moderate independent or conservative-leaning independents appear not to be supportive. And he has his opponent, Glenn Youngkin, comes out of the investment banking world. He's a self-funder. He got up on the air early, identifying himself and doing bio ads. He is carefully tiptoed away from Trump. When he's north of Richmond, Trump never leaves his lips. When he's south of Richmond, in the Bible Belt and Roanoke and Liberty College, and he fully embraces him. And I think everyone is expecting Terry tomorrow night to take him head on. Youngkin has avoided public debates. He's turned down 3 of them so far. He's agreed to only 2. Tomorrow night is the first one. And because of Youngkin's ducking, there's a great deal of expectation that Terry is going to marry Youngkin to Trump, who has endorsed Youngkin, and Youngkin has endorsed Trump. But the people in Northern Virginia, which is the driver of Democratic and electoral politics in Virginia, it's not quite so clear that that's where he is. I think they perceive him as more of a moderate. But as I say, the polls look good except for one, which is, an insider watch. The Trafalgar Group, which is a Republican polling organization that has made its bones being able to accurately portray the Trump vote, has the election at 47-46 at their latest poll. So it's very close. And tomorrow night will be a big deal, and it's going to be heavily covered by the media.
Thurgood, any different in your assessment and also your friendship with Terry?
But Peter hit the nail on the head, the happy warrior description. I think in some ways, I was whining just a moment ago about the term limit issue for governor in Virginia, but Democrats in this instance caught a break because we've had a governor who has had some significant missteps, a lieutenant governor who has had missteps to the point of probably facing penalties in court. I shouldn't overstate that, but we clearly had statewide officials at the top of the ticket who are going to be problematic running for re-election. And so Democrats have caught a break here that not only are we not saddled with the incumbents running for re-election, but we've got a popular effective incumbent in the sense that Terry has already served one term a couple of years ago. Peter noted with regard to Youngkin that one of the interesting things is that he's a Northern Virginia candidate, and that actually captures another aspect of this race. Virginia has been trending purple blue for a couple of cycles, several cycles now, and part of the reason for that you can see in the fact that, unless I'm mistaken, this is the first time both party candidates have been from Northern Virginia, which skews Democratic. It's also interesting that this is happening at the time when the last of the Civil War monuments on Monument Avenue in Richmond has come down. I mean, there's a lot going on in the state to suggest that there is a shift that continues. One of the things that I've noticed with the Youngkin campaign is that his ads, we were dealing with bio ads that were very gauzy and very well done, I thought, for Youngkin in Northern Virginia, at least, with a virtual absence of ads on Terry's side for the first half of the year. And there were very positive, gauzy ads to the point, the saturation was to the point where I think I probably could have recited the text for each. Terry has recognized that now that we're past Labor Day, he's got some issues that he needs to address, and he has done that with some ads touting his accomplishments, which is one of the benefits of having this system in Virginia, where some of his significant infrastructure projects are that he worked on and focused on during his term as governor are bearing fruit now. The primary highway through Northern Virginia, 66, was widened and recently reopened. You know, the timing could not have been better for him on things like that. Another thing I've noticed, I've wondered about with Youngkin is the strategy he's had. I described it to Peter as if it's possible to do too little too late. I think he may be doing too much too soon. He's done a couple of things with his attack ads that are leaving the door open for Terry to sort of brush them off in the coming weeks. One of which is he's played this game because he recognizes that Terry's got, as a Democrat in this region, he's got a vulnerability on some crime issues because the statistics have not been as good as they should be. His ads are basically couched as some people who want to defund the police support Terry. And it seems to me to be sort of an invitation to, I think we're going to see Terry take care of this as soon as tomorrow night in the debate. I don't know that that's a difficult thing for Terry to deal with, because he clearly does not want to defund the police. I think that if Youngkin wanted to trot that one out, it would have been much better later this month when there was not as much time available to Terry. Another move that I've seen Youngkin do is his other ad is to suggest that we should do away with the grocery tax. And I don't argue with that, but that's, again, the kind of thing you want to trot out at the last minute. In Virginia, if there are any other Virginians on this, you might remember a couple decades ago, Governor Gilmore ran as a Republican, and a couple of weeks before Election Day here, we pay car taxes. And he put up signs everywhere that said, vote for Gilmore, kill the car tax. It skewed the vote right at the end in October. And we're coming up and our car tax is due. I mean, it's been 20 years and we still pay the damn car tax. So it was good enough for him to trot out at the end. And I think if Youngkin played the grocery tax thing a little later, that might work. But I'm not sure whether his strategy is working here.
Yeah.
All right, well, it certainly looks positive in Virginia. I want to move on now to the midterms, and then we'll open it back up again. So as we start to head into 2022, again, not a good not a good forecast for the Democrats for a number of reasons. One is historical. In 7 of the last 8 elections, the public voted for change. If Americans want change, if the Democrats are in, they want them out. If the Republicans are in, they want them out. And if you go back to the last 4 midterms, you saw so Bush in 06, Republicans lost 6 seats in the Senate, 30 in the House. Obama 2010, 6 seats in the Senate, 63 seats in the House. Obama 2014, 9 and 13. Trump, it's the only time, the Democrats picked up the Republicans picked up 2 seats in the Senate, but lost 40 in the House, and all lost gubernatorial races there. So the Democrats, from a historical perspective, with the Americans just angry at government, no matter who's in, that is not a good sign going into the midterms. Now we'll talk that the Senate right now is looking, okay, it's 50-50 with Harris as the tie-breaking vote. This is Professor Sabato from University of Virginia. They're good in my alma mater. So he would say if the elections today, he would call it 50-49 with one toss-up, and that being Pennsylvania. So we're not going to talk about the Senate because hopefully the Democrats will hold the Senate, and it's going to probably be pretty static. The House is a different story. So right now, the Democrats have a 3-seat advantage in the House. So it's of the 435, there's 3 vacancies. So the Democrats have a majority of 220 to 212. So you flip, you flip 5 seats, and that's all you need to pick up for the Republicans to take the House. And if the Republicans do take the House, that pretty much ends Biden's legislative agenda for the rest of the first term. So very critical to see what happens in the House. So what happens in our system is, the House of 435 members gets reapportioned every 10 years, and that is due based on the census. So there's 435 House seats, and they move around every 10 years based on population. And right now, there are more red states picking up seats because people are moving to Texas, they're moving to Florida, they're moving to North Carolina, they're moving away from New York, they're moving away from Illinois. So blue states are losing population, therefore the blue states lose seats and the red states pick them up. And according to David Wasserman from the Cook Political Report, on redistricting of Texas, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, right now, if everything else stays the same, the Republicans pick up the 5 seats they need to get the majority. So the Republicans have a structural advantage because of redistricting. They have a historical advantage because they are the party outside of power. And they have the gerrymandering advantage. So what is gerrymandering? And this is a congressional seat or in Pennsylvania. And if you look back in 1952, the geographies were basically drawn so that you just mix up the population regardless of partisanship, and you would draw the map. And as time has gone on, and that district gets gerrymandered and gerrymandered and gerrymandered, that district now is called Donald Kicking Goofy, because it looks like Donald Duck kicking Goofy up the backside. That's what happens with gerrymandering, and this is what the Republicans are very good at doing. Gerrymandering is not new. Gerrymandering comes from a term back in the 1800s. There was a Governor Gerry of Massachusetts drew a map like a salamander to take advantage for his party, and that's why they call it gerrymandering. So it's not something the United States hasn't done, but it's something the Republicans do a much better job of than Democrats do. Democrats tend to give it to nonpartisan commissions. Republicans keep that power of redistricting and drawing maps for themselves. The other problem we have as Democrats is that the Democrats who are leaving office are leaving office in very weak Democratic, if not outright Republican seats. And so you see the partisanship of where the Democrats are leaving. It's seats that Biden barely won, or it's seats that Trump even carried, like Connor Lamb's seat. So you've got these 5 seats that are going to go plus Republican because of redistricting. And then you have the Republicans who are retiring are in very red districts, and the Democrats who are retiring outside of Val Demings are in light blue or even red districts. So we're also going to lose more seats based on retirements. And so the Democrats are really behind for every reason possible going into this election. So it's really not shaping up to be a good thing, except maybe New York is going to save the Democrats. This is a headline from today's New York Times, where New York has said, we're going to give redistricting to this nonpartisan commission. But now that the Democrats control the Assembly and the Senate in New York, they've said, you know what? We're going to gerrymander just like the Republicans do. And we are going to gerrymander where, while New York will lose 1 House seat, the GOP might lose 5 seats in New York alone. This, if it were to happen, is going to offset what could possibly take place in those 5 other states. So on that positive note, maybe the race isn't as bad as it's shaping up to be. Peter, how do you see all of this playing out?
Well, I think, historically, you've got it right. The Democrats have never played the redistricting game as well as the Republicans. And the one thing we have to give the conservative right is that they play the long game better than we do, whether it's in Supreme Court justices, redistricting, pro-choice, abortion issues. They play the long game. Democrats tend to be attracted to new, bright, shiny things. And the DNC, which should have no other priority higher than redistricting, ignores it and leaves it to the states, leaves it to chance. And you're right, we will rely on New York and Illinois to set the record straight and try and serve as a bulwark. But the real issue I see is where people in rural America and in the rock hard Republican states get their news from. When I've been bad, I force myself to watch and listen to Fox News and to look at the Sinclair broadcasting system. These are the 2 sources of news that Americans outside of the urban areas, these is where they get their information. And the dystopian view of America, in Fox News, I watched it for 3 hours the other day, and generally in an hour of daily news, you get about 12 to 13 stories an hour. Fox News, 90% of them were bad news, were crime, the border, disappearing people, and the America outside of the urban and some suburban areas. I mean, they really have a view of America that is driven by these stations and supported by talk radio. And we've never been able to counteract that. So, I mean, I think we rely on gerrymandering. We rely on trying to spend our money more wisely this time than ever before. In the last election, we spent $100 million trying to win the South Carolina Senate seat against Lindsey Graham. Who thought that was a good idea? If we spent, 25 more million in Maine, we might have won the seat. And so we have to make some hard decisions going into this election. Amy McGrath is never going to beat Mitch McConnell. Lindsey Graham is not going to get beat. And Republicans like that, while it might make us feel better to put some money there, it's a waste of time, and we don't have the money to waste. But
Thurgood, what's your sense going into the midterms? And then we'll turn it over, Jim. There's a whole bunch of questions. We'll just leave it to you to have everybody ask for themselves if they want, or if you want to ask them. But Thurgood?
Okay. Peter finished on the point that I think is paramount when things are so tight in the House and Senate. the prioritizing of these races is going to be one of the three critical aspects of this, and the one that is the most controllable by the party leadership. The House seats in particular, Steve, your charts were great. The one thing I would add is that on the House seats that are the most in potential flux, it's roughly 45-45 on seats that for Democrats and Republicans were tight seats, 50 to 55% for the winner, or even a handful on each side that were less than 50%. So with that sort of a mix, and history generally not in favor of the incumbent party, prioritizing these races and where to put our assets, both in terms of the financial resources, but also in terms of where the president, the vice president, and others campaign will be critical. And the two other pieces of this are issues that we raised when we were talking earlier about lessons from California. Historically, the other important aspect of the midterm outcome is the president's approval rating. And the closer to 50 it gets, the better off the incumbent party is. The president, until just the last month or so, has been holding pretty consistently. And so hopefully his numbers will rebound as we get clear of some of the recent turmoil that the administration has had to endure. The other piece of this is the third important component is the economy. And I think there's every reason to think that even though we've had a couple of weeks in the markets with some turmoil, I think that's going to hold steady for us. So there's reason to be optimistic, but it's going to be tight, in my opinion.
All right, Jim, we can stay probably till about 9:15. So I know there's a lot of questions in there. So Jim, go
Yes.
Fire ahead.
Redistricting has kicked off a bunch of questions. So Catherine has put in a very interesting question. Catherine, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask that, or I can summarize it for you.
Well, having moved to North Carolina from New England, and we're trying to break them from within here. And hi, cousin Peter. I'm curious about what you guys might see happening in North Carolina, because I feel like we're kind of on a brink, and it's
Oh, Catherine, you're back on mute.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't know if the national party is concentrating on North Carolina, because it feels like we're on a brink, and we have a chance here, but I don't know. I just saw in the paper today, they're again talking about redistricting. Since I've lived here 6 years, I have 3 different voting cards, each with a different area that I'm supposed to be voting in. So just curious if you have an idea about that.
Well, I mean, there's no question that North Carolina should be a targeted state, and we have a Democratic governor there, but we have a very partisan legislature. And they've worked very hard at limiting the electoral powers of the governor, and in terms of limiting more expansive voting opportunities. If the Democrats are not focusing on North Carolina, it is a terrible mistake. I mean, we always spend a ton of money on Florida with this mistaken belief that somehow Florida will inch its way blue. North Carolina is is very much more doable. I mean, it has the golden triangle where Democrats should be able to rack up, 60 to 65% of the vote, like Northern Virginia, and that could drive the state. But again, North Carolina is not a bright, shiny object, and we tend not to focus on it, but we should.
Next one, Jim.
So we've got another interesting question, and at the risk of sending us down a rabbit hole here, Lily has a great question about the Supreme Court and some of the moving chess pieces and the implication for the very thin margin in the Senate. What are your thoughts around the go forward plan on the Supreme Court?
So I'll make it even a little bit more contentious. So Peter, what do you think Justice Breyer should do between now and the midterm elections?
God Almighty! I watched Breyer on the Sunday news, and he's one of my favorite targets. And what a smug guy he was in these interviews. And it's clearly, listen, the guy is 83 years old. He's done great work. If he does not retire before January 1st, we will not get him replaced unless we nominate, someone who is so above the fray that the Republicans can't churn out. He needs to step down, and he needs to step down now, so that the president has the ability to nominate a young progressive woman to the court. And if he doesn't, he is just fiddling with his own ego, and it drives me crazy. Because in his new book, well, we have to balance things out. The court should not be perceived as a partisan group. What planet are you on? Thurgood, as a former clerk, go to it to defend the institution.
Just for the record, I was a clerk on a lesser court.
Yeah.
I should catalog the number of times when during a fall campaign, and we're not there yet, an issue has come up where I have said to myself, this will finally get the attention of registered Democrats on their way to the polls, in terms of putting the effect of an election on the Supreme Court and courts in general on their radar, and I have yet to see that happen. So my latest reason for thinking this could happen is not only the battle over Barrett and the battle over Kavanaugh, but the Texas abortion law. And I have, like North Carolina in every election cycle, I have thought, well, this is the time. I'm not prepared to suggest it's gonna catch fire this time. I feel as if I have gone for that bait too many times. I just don't feel as if the vast majority of voters make that connection the way. Look, I'm fairly willing to assume everybody on this screen recognizes the importance of that, but there are an awful lot of people that just don't quite put the issues together.
Yeah. But Thurgood, if the Mississippi law, which is gonna get to the court presumably, and the Mississippi, so Roe v. Wade is basically the woman has a right to choose clearly through the first trimester, and potentially into the second trimester, and the Mississippi law is 15 weeks is viability, and anything after 15 weeks is illegal. If the Supreme Court were to overturn Roe and uphold the Mississippi law, would that do the trick, Peter? Would that nationalize women's rights as a way to get the Democratic and frankly a lot of most of the independents and probably a fair number of moderate Republicans to say, we now need to protect women's rights and get a House and Senate that will do so, since the court overturned it?
Well, I think it could, but then that's implying that the court is not political and is going to move in some sort of regular fashion to address it. If the court is political, they won't address it until after the election. Yeah, they'll slow walk it. They'll take their time, and it won't be an issue. But I do think it could become an energizing issue, and it's started to become more energized, in part because of the obvious hypocrisy between people demanding that the government interfere with people's health choices when it comes to abortion and taking to the barricades to avoid getting vaccinations. How does that work?
Let me combine a couple of questions and kind of take us back to legislative agenda and redistricting. So Paul Risley and Ben ask similar questions. Paul's asking, I'm paraphrasing, but where's the momentum around the legislative agenda around bills that need to pass in case we lose the House? And then Ben asks specifically, do you think that some of the voting rights legislation could bring us back from the brink on some of these redistricting issues?
Well, Peter, I know you're following the infrastructure is very closely given your work with the flight attendants.
Yeah, there's genuine pandemonium up on the Hill right now, because you have guys like Manchin and Senator Sinema from Arizona saying, well, the reconciliation bill is too great. There's too much here, and the compromise that's kind of being discussed as well. We'll pass a much lesser bill and see how it works, and then take it up in 2022. Well, this is about the height of the power that the Democrats have right now. And if they can't pass things now, 2022 is going to be a stalemate all the way through as the specter of the election comes up. So, I think it's going to be down to the wire. There are contentious issues like the budget issue, the debt extension, the recovery, the reconciliation bill, and they're going to come down to single digit votes in both places, and there's no clear outcome predicted at this point. It's going to be a battle.
I mean, and then Thurgood, I'll go over to you, but like, just a micro example, and I see Rob Craybill, proud New Jersey resident on the Zoom, and like one of the things really important to people in New Jersey and New York and California is SALT, right? The state taxes being able to be itemized as a deduction, which Trump and the Republicans took away because it punished blue states like New Jersey, New York, and California. Well, now our former Clinton colleague, Josh Gottheimer, is leading the charge to make sure that the state and local tax deduction, the SALT deductions, get back in, but that costs a lot of money. And so, what are you going to take out? Are you going to take out, universal health care, lowering the age on Medicaid? Are you going to take out universal schooling? And so, you have all these trade-offs. And so the New Jersey Democrats and the New York Democrats are saying SALT's got to be in there. Reinstating the SALT deduction's got to be in there. And the other Democrats are saying, well, how are you going to pay for it? And then the other Democrats saying, well, you're not going to pay for it with mine. So it's not necessary. There's a lot of consternation, within the Democratic Party not only between the progressives and the moderates and between the Manchins and Sinemas of the world and, and the Warrens and AOCs on the other hand, but between the Northeasterners and the Midwesterners. I don't know how this is going to play out. We have our own party issues to deal with. I don't know, Rob, if you want to add in anything on SALT and how much that means to people from your home state.
Well, I'll just mention that the Republicans, while they hate to raise taxes, they seem to target me with laser precision between getting rid of the deduction for state and local taxes, limiting the deduction for property taxes, and this goes back, I think, to Bush, fiddling with how the foreign earned income tax credit is calculated. I think that was the only tax Bush seemed to raise during his time. So they've done a pretty good job of hitting Democrats from the Northeast living in Singapore.
So Thurgood, are the Democrats going to be able to get together, and is Pelosi and Schumer, are they going to be able to work their magic and get something through on infrastructure and reconciliation, both? within the next month and a half and raise the debt ceiling at the same time?
Well, the debt ceiling, I think, actually will happen because it essentially has to happen. I know that there's a fight ongoing, and I think Secretary Yellen's pushing hard enough that's going to happen. I'm not sure anyone who opposes doing that fully comprehends, or either it's that or a cynical position. But I think one of the issues in general, Paul Risley's question, if I'm not mistaken, used the word momentum. And I think the answer to the question where the momentum is, the momentum, unfortunately, like I try to be optimistic about this fall push, but the momentum seems to be where it has always been, which is fine, but it has heretofore been inadequate. And I know I'm dating myself, but ACC basketball fans will remember a defense that Dean Smith used to run in North Carolina called the Four Corners that was eventually outlawed. And it was basically, you would sit and watch, and the four players would be positioned in the four corners, and Phil Ford, the guard, would just run around, and everyone would sit and watch, even to the point where the other four players would kind of say, well, this is kind of interesting. And it's as if Mitch McConnell is sitting and watching a collection of Democrats run his four corners defense for him. I don't see anything having changed during the break. And it's very frustrating to sit in the stands and watch a handful of people play this game where it's keep away.
Yeah. One thing I saw where Mike indicated that the Republicans seem to be willing to burn down, the federal government for a political advantage. There is no question that the minority leader in the House is as unprincipled as any political leader I've seen since Newt Gingrich. And if they can close the government down, even for a single day, that will be their calling card that the Democrats are incapable of governing. And they're going to push for that very hard. And it's going to take some real leadership to battle that. And Pelosi has shown great skill so far, but this is going to be, the month of September is going to be a hard month.
Jim, I know we have a question from Glenn. Any other questions in the chat?
There are a number. I guess one about redistricting that we didn't talk about, just to go back to that for a moment. There was a question about Oregon. I don't think that's on many people's radar screen, but going back, I believe that was Mike might have brought that up, asking, are we going to pick up a seat or two in Oregon?
Yeah, I follow Oregon fairly closely. The most important thing is it looks like they're going to give my favorite member of Congress, Peter DeFazio, some breathing room, finally. He's been willing to take what amounts to almost a swing district for the last 5 elections, and he wins 52-48, 54-46. They're finally going to give him a little bit of breathing room, and he is really one of the most effective chairmen as the head of T&I, Transportation and Infrastructure. And they think they might be able to squeeze out one other district that'll end up being 50-50 or 52-48. So there is some room there. But the most important thing is that Chairman DeFazio will get a little bit of breathing room finally, and he deserves it.
Glenn, you had one?
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Peter and Thurgood and panel, and Jim for doing a great job. So a couple questions, both unrelated in many ways, but first is on Biden. And, look, he doesn't look good necessarily when we see him on TV. There are the stumbles and there are the aging issues that he has that, of course, we're all going to face at some point. When does Kamala start really stepping out into the spotlight, if in fact she's going to be the heir apparent? And secondly, to Steve's point earlier about SALT, in administrations past, it would have been the chief executive that kind of got everybody in line. And if that's not going to be Pelosi or Schumer, is Biden capable of getting people in line for his agenda to get it passed in the limited time that's left to get whatever he wants to get passed? Thanks.
Peter, over to you. How's Biden doing right now? And how's Harris
Well,
doing right now?
I think there is some general concern among Democrats about Joe. A lot of these errors that have led to, or at least supported his decline in popularity, were self-inflicted. Very sloppy use of language, amounting to almost the same as if you want your doctor, you'll keep your doctor promises. We'll get every American out. Who thought that was a good line? And I think he's had some real stumbles, and they've been self-inflicted. And can he recover? Absolutely. I think his move today with England and Australia, as a new alliance, is a good move. As far as Kamala Harris goes, she has been heavily criticized as not ready for prime time, and she's going to have to embark on a restoration campaign before she's taken seriously as the heir apparent. Because I would say right now that the majority of Democrats are looking elsewhere and worrying about who is going to be our standard bearer in 2022, and that the idea of President Biden running again is almost universally dismissed. And so the question is, who's next? And we may see something in Virginia. Terry McAuliffe harbors desires to go further, and maybe he's somebody to watch. But right now, as far as Kamala Harris, the vice president, goes, hadn't been a good opening act. She needs to get focused and pick up her game if she's going to be the front runner.
Would you be able to say a little bit more about specific incidents or actions that you think have led people to make that assessment of Harris?
On Harris?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's held to a different standard, right? I think people line up, that the media and the talking heads have a leg out for her because they simply don't like the idea of a woman being in that position of power. So they hold her to a different standard. And having said that, that's the reality, and she can't afford to make any mistakes. I mean, she needs to be focused. She needs, she accepted these responsibilities, of the border. What a loser that's going to be. And she's going to have to figure out how she's going to accomplish something on the two big tasks that the president has dumped on her before she's going to be taken more seriously as a candidate. But underlying it all is that there is among the political elite an absolute prejudice against a woman and a woman of color being in that position, I believe.
Thank you so much for sharing that point, because I think that's often a frame that it's important that we remember in this context.
Yeah, she has a higher bar to overcome to appear to be competent and an effective leader, and that's historic and it's unfair. But
and I want another point though is she's an outsider. She was not in Washington all that long. Now, Thurgood, you worked, for Vice President Gore. I mean, before you were White House Cabinet Secretary, you worked in the Vice President's office. And he came in with people like you, a very seasoned Washington team. He had been in Washington for so long. His father, he grew up, went to St. Albans. His father was a senator, et cetera, et cetera. How much of it do you think is that her staff isn't there yet, and that once they get into the flow of things, they'll get better? And from your experience, having lived in the vice president's office in those early days of 93.
Well, it's the reference has been made to the inside and the outside game, and I want to get to the second part of Glenn's question about timing for her and trying to step up. But before I get to that, I'm disappointed that she took on or was assigned a couple of these tasks that as Peter referenced, appear to be tasks guaranteed to take on water and not deliver. I'm not suggesting that she should only be accepting things where their lead pipe cinches. She's got to demonstrate that she can grind out some victories for the administration. But I'm a little surprised that she has not thrown herself into some of the smaller skirmishes on the Hill and trying to deliver some votes. And I know it's a different era, but one of the things that Al Gore focused on early on was to work on a number of senators and House members who were moderates, who were gettable in either party on any number of issues, to try to find alliances and build those alliances. And I think that there are opportunities there for her to do that. I think in terms of foreign affairs, look, she had an unfortunate couple of missteps on her first trip out, but I would like to see that's the place where there are opportunities for her to grind out some victories for the administration, where it is a matter of hard work dealing with counterparts around the world, number twos, number ones, on some alliances that are not front burner issues for Secretary Blinken or the president, but are opportunities to advance the ball. That's the sort of the inside game, either trying to pull together some votes or support on the B level issues in the Congress, or going around and trying to do some of these foreign policy opportunities, which are kind of bread and butter vice presidential opportunities. The other piece of this is the outside game, the political game for her. And Glenn raises what I think is the fascinating question here is how, and Vice President Pence faced this as well. How do you demonstrate your loyalty to the boss while keeping your viability as open and as positive as you can? And I think one of the places for her to do that, and we should watch for this, is at the conclusion of this legislative session, she needs to head out on the campaign trail for a targeted list of midterm candidates. And she's got to just go out and grind it out, doing political events and fundraising for them, whether it gets her headlines or not. Ideally, there are no headlines, and she just puts a lot of good credit in the bank, literally and figuratively, to build either on behalf of the Biden-Harris reelection campaign or in her own behalf.
Jim, any more in the chat before we wrap it up?
Maybe one more. There was an interesting question from Kelly. And Kelly, if you can unmute yourself and ask that question, or I can ask it on your behalf. What's your preference there?
Let's hear from Kelly.
You're being put on the spot.
I am, and I hope you don't mind. I'm cross-stitching and listening in. This has been an amazingly robust.
And she's a new member. Welcome.
And I'm a new member as of yesterday, I guess. So recently moved to Singapore. I'm from Ohio, obviously. And I'm really wondering, is there any possibility that we can actually change the culture, given that there's an echo chamber of redistricting, specifically in Ohio, with the redistricting maps, and it's quite entrenched. And given what we just came out today with the news, and that the supermajority of our state legislature, which has its own issues anyways, how are we to change the culture, and what can we do? And how do we keep the faith and the hope that we can actually still be able to have a democracy given that the odds are stacked against us in these particular odds? That's my question. So thank you, Jim, for flagging that question. And thank you, everybody, for welcoming me into this community, and happy to be here.
Peter is our cultural expert. So Peter.
You know, I think, you know, I hate to take off my partisan hat, but I do believe that fundamentally, in those states like Ohio, where we're up against overwhelming odds, that the best strategy is to move towards a nonpartisan redistricting commission, and to push hard if there's a state referendum. These things tend to win on state referendums, and to push towards a state referendum if that's possible, or some other petition drive to take the redistricting you know, fiasco out of the hands of you know, overly partisan legislators. I don't know of any other way. In Ohio, it's awfully tough. You know, we're going to focus on Tim Ryan's campaign, and he may be able to win like Sherrod Brown did, and Tim is a fabulous candidate. But boy, that's a tough state, and that's another state where, on a national level, we get seduced into spending time and money, and like Florida, but never get within real striking distance in a presidential election. But it's a great question, and you know, if we move too aggressively to being, well, you know, let's do everything on a nonpartisan basis, then we're really going into a knife fight without a knife. I mean, we are disarming ourselves. So, Thurgood?
Can't improve on that.
And I've got one last slide I'm going to share for 1 second. We're two different countries, right? Trump carried 84% of U.S. counties, but the counties Biden carried created 70% of the GDP, right? So the people who are voting for Trump are the ones who have the least economic success. Yet because of the Electoral College, because of the fact that every state gets 2 senators, regardless of population, you have an extraordinarily unbalanced split between people who are more educated and people who are less educated, people who have more wealth and people who have less wealth. And I don't know how you solve this problem within our existing structure. And you know, we're you know, saying, yeah, let's have nonpartisan redistricting, except if New York comes through and overrules their own nonpartisan redistricting to get 5 seats to a Democratic advantage, then we're doing everything we say we shouldn't be doing.
Right. We need to have nonpartisan redistricting, but we need to hold Illinois and New York in reserve to bring in the troops when it doesn't turn out as well. But you know, if you looked at your map, Steve, and I'll finish with this, I think if you did an overlap of Fox and Sinclair viewership, it would be a dead match. You know, when I ran a campaign in New Hampshire with the dreadful Manchester Union leader, we did our targeting based on Manchester Union leader home delivery, and we stayed out of those areas because we knew we weren't ever going to make a break, and we won the 3rd Democrat governor in the history of the state. So.
Okay, with that, I'll close it. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah for the final close. And I guess on behalf of Thurgood and Peter, I'll just say thank you for asking us to do this. We thoroughly enjoy it, and we will love to do it again, maybe sometime after Virginia, and break that one down, and also talk about hopefully the Democrats' successful legislative agenda. And I think the lesson, look, we take in part from California, the lesson in part we take, or hopefully we'll take from Virginia, is that money matters, organizing matters. You know, Democrats Abroad does an amazing job of that real nuts and bolts of getting out the vote, doing the phone banking, doing the emails, it's critical. Not Democrats abroad, but a lot of us got together and raised money for Biden Harris. We're going to maybe try and do that coming up for the DCCC is a way to get funding in. So feel free to reach out to me. If you don't have my contact information, Sarah can get it to you, Jim can get it to you. I'm pretty easy to find. And we'll try and see if we can't do something with Congressman Maloney, who's the chair of the DCCC, to help out, just as we did and made a difference both from an organizing perspective and a donation perspective for
Thank
the
you,
president
Steve,
and
so
the vice
much for
president.
raising that point. When we were talking in preparation for this event, I think I was keen to say that obviously you guys you provide fantastic insights that make us all want to engage with politics kind of on a more meta level. But we have to remember it's not a spectator sport, right? So I've just dropped, picking up on what Steve mentioned. We're not asking you for money just yet, but have dropped a couple points for action that are quite urgent. I won't be pushing my California group right now. We can take a bit of a breather, but we've got a couple phone banking campaigns coming on that anyone can participate in. Raf, our deputy chair who's on this call, is leading a New Jersey voters group. Please sign up on WhatsApp if that's of interest. And we are desperately seeking a charming and active Virginia voter in Singapore. If that sounds like you or someone you know, please drop a line to our chair, Vanessa. This has been a fascinating talk. We've kept almost everyone on for a full half an hour longer than scheduled, which is surely a tribute to the skills of Peter, Thurgood, and Stephen. Thank you so much. And thanks also, Jim, for your great work behind the scenes, keeping everything going. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.